Okay, great. So, welcome everybody. We often get asked in the feedback forms about hearing more about FinOps and F&O. Here we have. It's my real great pleasure to introduce Touseef in his session, introducing an introduction to building Power Platform apps for F&O. So I will hand it over to you, Touseef.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you, everyone, for joining my session. Let me just see if I can. Yeah. So my name is Touseef Zafar. I'm head of technical services in HSO. I have been working in the ERP space, mainly for Xapta and Microsoft ERP solutions since 2006. And I have, as I said, my main experience has been on the ERP side of things. I'm technical. I have a technical background. I've been a developer for a majority of that 15 odd years that I have worked on finance and operations. And yeah, that's me. So today's session, what we're going to be talking about today. So as I named the session as a fit gap or an app, I think that probably gives an idea in terms of what we will be covering today. If you've been part of an ERP implementation, you will know that 99% of the time there will be some requirements that cannot be implemented in the solution out of the box. So you end up doing some customization. And the customization in finance and operations world or ERP worlds are very different to the customizations that you guys are quite familiar with in your Dynamics 365 CE apps, which are usually creating entities, forms, which doesn't really require that much of development experience or the tooling. In comparison to in finance and operations, and it's an X++ language, so it's a proper software development cycle, which has to go through the development and the release process, etc. So as I said, my main experience has been on finance and operations, and I've been focusing mainly for a number of different markets, including retail, rental, manufacturing, and professional services. And during this, during this time, we have done all sorts of projects from 10, 15, 20 days of customization or developments all the way to 5,000 days of developments. It really depends on the type of the projects and the appetite that customer have in terms of the customizations that they want. So in today's session, as a high-level agenda that we will be covering. So I will just give a bit of an intro to the D365 finance and operations. And you requested that just to make sure that if anybody who have no experience of D365, they know what we're talking about. And then I will talk about this concept of the fit gap and app, and then where Power Platform comes into the play, what design approach that we have used in HSO and in my experience and what have worked well for us, which obviously I'm happy to share with you guys. And then a couple of examples of using that approach, and then question and answers at the end. So during the session, please feel free to type your questions. I will try and pick them up as we go along. Otherwise, we will, I will be happy to give you to answer some of your questions towards the end of the session. Okay, this is a slightly outdated slide from Microsoft, but this is hopefully gives you an idea. If you look at the Microsoft Business Application ecosystem, you will recognize some of these apps that you have been working, you work with, on a regular basis, likes of the CRM or sales. So if you see in here, finance and operations. Apologies, there are some kids. Okay, so if you see the finance and operations, which sits in the same business application stack, which is obviously connected with the rest of the Microsoft stack, including Power Platform, Office 365, and obviously some of the Azure services as well. So what's an ERP? So I'm not going to go into the detail, but just a very high level intro. It basically manages all your finances, tax, supply chain management, inventory control, production control, retail headquarters, and you can see a little bit more detail, much more detail in here, in fact, in terms of what different areas the ERP system, and more specifically Microsoft Dynamics 365 for finance and operations actually covers. Microsoft recently have rebranded the products and split them into two products, basically. D365 for Finance, which is a separate solution, or from the licensing point of view, at least, with the D365 supply chain management, and they have their, as you can see on the slide, listed all the functionalities they offer. Okay, so that was the functional kind of an intro of F&O. Now there is a bit of low code, no code extensibility, options, high level from that finance and operations offer. So finance and operations offer a ability to add custom fields, which you can do without writing any code as a user. And the other option from F&O point of view is what's called business events. And there are some, so this is kind of two options that are available out of the box that you can actually use from the low code, no code point of view. Custom fields to just to add new fields of various types. Very similar experience to adding a new field to entity in common data service, and then expose that entity additional those custom fields through the OData to the existing OData entities. Business events are outbound, and they basically alert the external system when a business event happens in finance and operation. For example, when a purchase order is confirmed. So these are two options within F&O. Now, in addition to that, you also have a bunch of integration options available from finance and operations point of view. In comparison, in context to common data model or common data service, finance and operations is a highly normalized database. What does that mean is that the data schema is extremely complicated. For example, even like something basic as customer information is actually stored in 5 or 6 tables, depending on, because the addresses are stored in different ways, and just to basically all to take advantage of all the database normalization, because of the normalization, and in order to facilitate the process of import and the import or export of the data, they have Microsoft introduced a concept of data entities, which is very similar to CE data entities, which then are exposed through two main frameworks: one data management framework, and more for real-time type integration, mainly through OData. And they are, as mentioned here, data management framework is mainly for asynchronous type integrations to get the bulk of the data out or into finance and operations, and OData is obviously for mobile type experience, real time interaction. In addition to that, you can also expose business logic from finance and operations as well, using the as a web service, basically. Okay. We'll be talking some of these options a little bit more detail when we go through go into some of the design concepts and how it integrates the data with common data service, etc. Okay, so just a bit of a kind of an introduction. But what does mean by a gap? When at least in this presentation, when we're referring to a gap, gap is usually when you're implementing a business application into whether it's a Microsoft application or non-Microsoft applications, you will be applying business processes to a business app, and usually you will find that either the standard business process in the application is not suitable for your client, or client have a very bespoke needs that are unique to them, therefore they need to be implemented. And sometimes you also find that the standard functionality is relatively limited, especially if it's a new module or new functionality that has been added into the business app, or you want to simplify the process because of the team skills. The people who will be using it, they are not as expert users, therefore you want to minimize the interaction or simplify the user experience. It could also be technical limitations, for example, you want to use a business application on the mobile device in an offline mode or something like that. It could also be your business strategy that you want to move away, let's say, from on-prem application. You want to move to the cloud over a period of time, and then you cannot make that jump in one go. So therefore, you gradually start moving into that direction. It could also be the cost and the usability as well. So that there are a number of factors that could create a gap. Usually when you hit a gap in an ERP implementation or in any business application implementation, you really have three choices in a way. You look to adopt the process, to align the business process to the process that is offered through the business application. So you change the business to match the application, or you look for ready-made solutions that are out there, or look to make some bespoke modifications. Of course, there is another option of manual workaround, which is basically, not entirely changing the business process or not changing the business application. It's just trying to find the balance between the two. And what usually when you are talking about the customization or the bespoke code, you have a number of challenges. Time and resource constraints, and of course it takes time to enhance or extend or modify a business process in an ERP system. Obviously, it's expensive. It takes time not only from your implementation partner but also from the organization as well. And there are other things that are just number of things that are mentioned here. I will just pick on a couple of them. For example, the changing business expectations. In today's environment, where business processes are changing quite frequently and rapidly. For example, the business processes that 6 weeks ago, before the COVID-19, would if you have spoken to a business, they might like, for example, the e-com strategy would have been very different to today. So some of the challenges that you see is that the businesses have to constantly adapt to the changing external environment, which they have very little control on. So therefore, you are looking for tools and options which are very easy to very easily can be adopt to the new requirement. And security compliances, security and compliance is another big area where which makes the customization very challenging. If you are to build any bespoke solution, you need to make sure it's in line, for example, with GDPR, is able to cope with all, it adheres to your corporate security requirements, etc., etc. Okay, so typical use of an app. I'm just going to just trying to talk about a number of concepts, and then I will try to bring them back, bring them together towards the end. When we talk about an app is usually interact with the data. It could be just to view the data, it could be edit, process, or even take an action on that data. It's usually in context of multiple data sources. And what does that mean by that is that if it's a Canvas app, for example, you can combine data from F&O and any of the common data service based apps like of the marketing, field service, etc. And so that's another reason why typically we will introduce an app. Connect with non-business data, for example, let's say the Twitters and the social media sort of data. Did you want to bring it together, and you do or even Outlook data or MailChimp and things like that. Another reason we introduce app is to actually reduce the licensing cost. That's another big factor that that we have encountered. For example, if you are building, finance and operation license or the ERP licenses are typically very expensive. If a user needs access to a very small functionality of that system, or which can very easily be replicated into Power Platform, it usually works out much cheaper for the business to implement it in the Power Platform, and then just use the various data connectors that are available to exchange the data, with the ERP system. And that way you can reduce your cost quite significantly. One of the common examples we have seen this is dealing with the timesheet and expenses type requirements, or capturing lots of raw transaction which needs to go through some sort of an approval process before they become, let's say, project transactions in finance and operations. So you can do all the raw data collection and its enhancement and it's enrichment between in the Power Platform, and then just push that data back into F&O. So therefore, you're reducing your cost significantly. Finance and operation does not have a mobile offline mobile experience. There is a mobile client with a very limited mobile offline mobile experience, but but if you move the data into Power Platform and you use the Power Platform native capabilities of the offline experience, that you can definitely achieve much more there. So in terms of when I've been talking about the Power Platform, what does that mean? Which of these elements I've been referring to? I'm sure you guys have seen this many times before, so I won't spend much time on it. But it includes the Power Platform, the Power Apps, Power BI, Power Automate, and Virtual Agent. Majority of the time, when all the business applications that we have we have developed, or the customizations that we have developed for our clients, they've been mainly based on these two elements. I.e. the Power Apps and the Power Automate. Power BI, because finance and operations actually have embedded Power BI experience, so the Power BI is already part of the ERP system. If you can you can implement your requirements directly in F&O. Okay, so why Power Platform? So if you remember some of these logos, you actually will recognize they are exactly the same that I was talking about when we were discussing earlier. Is that what are the challenges for the with the bespoke development? Power Platform actually addresses majority, if not all, of those challenges. There's a quick return of investment. It's low cost. It offers you the security and the compliance that are whether it's an app level security using the data loss prevention policies, or it's a user level security using the standard CRM, XRM, or the rules and the security rules and privileges, etc. It provides all sorts of it obviously is very agile, not only being able to develop something very quickly that addresses a business requirement, but being able to change and adopt to the changing business needs as well. It also works with the legacy systems. This is another big thing that we have seen, especially with the new capabilities of Power Automate. It makes it much more sense. The old systems, old on-prem systems that did, for example, do not have APIs, etc. They can still be catered for. Another beauty of the Power Platform is that, as I was talking about earlier, is those kind of workaround or semi-automated processes where not entire process is fully automated or run on any ERP or any other application. It could be a combination of doing things manually and doing things on an app. Another big part of why Power Platform is very powerful when it comes to these type of implementation is the cross-platform integration, being able to talk to other platforms using the native connectors, 230 odd connectors. Okay, so down to basics, and I'm going to go into a bit more detail at referring, in the context of this presentation, is that what makes a solution is usually a business process or a requirement that you want to implement. You have some data that you want to interact with, and you need an interface to talk to that data, and then you want to secure that data. Very basic, low level. So what does a business process or a requirement mean? I got an example here, which I will demo this solution as well, which was built on a Power Platform in a couple of hours. For example, if you have worked in a finance system, one of the common requirements is that you like to validate the VAT numbers for your vendors and customers. Very simple and basic requirement. You can go to some of the EU websites that are EU government websites where you can put the VAT number and you get the details of the customer or the vendor. So let's say the business requirement is that we would like to be able to run this process from the D365 Finance and Operations. So we don't have to go out and look for a third-party application out there. You just want to run it from F&O. Okay, so the next part and the most important part is the data. And this is the bit I think it's very important. If I can only communicate this very well to you guys, and you understand what options this gives you, I think that will justify this session. being able to get the data into common data service and getting out of the common data service, it's probably the most important element of building bespoke apps using Power Platform. And as things stands today, there are three main options that are available to get this data in and out from common data service. One option is what's called data integrator and CDS data integrator, and that's the functionality that is available that you use configured from the Power Apps admin portal, and you will connect to an instance of finance and operations and to exchange the data. Basically, it's a 4-level mapping, as I call it. So one level is between an instance of common data service to an instance of finance and operations. That's level 1. Level 2 is the legal entity from finance and operations point of view to a business unit, let's say, in the common data service in CDS. Third level is an entity-to-entity mapping. So if you remember that diagram that I showed earlier, is that finance and operations offer a number of entities. You take those entities and you map them to entity in the common data service. It could be a standard entity or a bespoke entity. And the third level and the last level is the field-to-field level mapping. So you set this up. It's a unidirectional integrator, very easy to set up. Even Microsoft have actually released a number of default templates that you can use as well, which you can allow you to connect these two systems. And you just set it up and running, and it will start moving the data between the two instances for you. As I said, that's a unidirectional approach, which basically means the data will only flow in one direction. In comparison to that, the other option, which is relatively new, was launched just last month, going into GA last month, sorry, which is dual write. And same concept as explained in the data integrator. The only difference is this is real time and it's bidirectional, and it supports the delete operations as well. So of course makes it much more powerful. So for example, you can take the customers from F&O and you map them to accounts into CE. And if you make changes to F&O, those changes are reflected straight away in CE and vice versa. Third option is, which is using the data flows, i.e. the Power Query Online type functionality as well. Majority of the apps that we have built, they've been around these two options. And of course, not to forget all the other connectors that are available. And this is where, as I mentioned earlier, is the ability to talk to the other platforms and bring the data from them or send the data back to those platforms comes in. Okay, so data is the first element. Second element, then giving you an interface to interact with that data. And that obviously comes with Power Apps. And of course, two types of Power Apps, Canvas apps and the model-driven apps. Now, in terms of our experience, majority of the apps that we have built have actually been Canvas apps. If they are specific to users or one users or small number of users, it tends to be Canvas app. If they are mission critical, apps, or that they are more very likely to be model driven apps. Or that's kind of what we aim for. Again, another thing that we have experienced is that customer can also create these apps very quickly and very easily, as you can imagine. So we as a partner, sometimes we playing a role to set things up for our clients, i.e. get the two platform integrated, get the entities integrated, get the data moving between them, and then give them the training or enable them to be able to build apps themselves. I'm just looking at the question. There's a okay, we'll pick it up. It says towards the end. So I mean, they have their own advantages, as you can imagine. They are designed to cater for different requirements. And just to quickly go through them, you've probably seen this slide before, but it basically. One is more user experience based. Canvas apps is all about user experience. You have a much more control, down to the pixels, how you want the app to look like, etc. Versus you start with the data. You would start with the data on the model-driven apps. I think there are lots of other benefits. There are a lot of other differences that are mentioned here. The most important one is the model-driven app is restricted to the CDS entities only. However, if you use the integration options and you move your data into common data service, and then you can build your model-driven apps on top of as well. So you are effectively interacting with the F&O data via CDS. That's another thing that we have implemented in a number of our clients. And of course, the security, another difference is the secure in the model-driven app. If you are using one of the connectors, the security of the data is responsibility of the data source. So if you are consuming F&O entities, the security remains in F&O. Versus if you move into the CDS, then you need to manage that security using the standard security options that you have available. Okay, and then talking about security, a few more things to talk about the security. As I said, you know, the security at the data source level versus security in the common data service. Then app level security, you know, users versus service accounts. So then that's another thing. If you are using the connectors, you need to think about using the service account instead of the user accounts for all the obvious reasons. And then obviously all the other, because once you have taken the data out from F&O into CDS, then you know, all the rules, security rules that are implemented in F&O needs to be considered for re-implementation into the common data service to ensure that, you know, the two apps remain consistent, or this customization that you're doing remain consistent, and then not to, you know, and of course the DLP policies as well, which to implement at the app level. Okay, let's go into a couple of examples. Okay, so I mentioned this earlier as well. Very basic, very simple example. If you have ever worked with this, if you even Google it, there are a lot of EU organizations that allow you to search for against the VAT database. You can put the VAT number, and it confirms the name of the organization and what they do, and their registered address, etc. So the example that I'm going to talk you through and then demo it and then show you the code as well, how it's been implemented. It's this, it's this very basic, simple example. So let me just. So the approach that we have been taking is that if you can see that I've highlighted a number of areas, which basically get us thinking how to design these bespoke requirements using Power Platform. So, for example, if you're reading this, I need to verify the VAT number within D365. This is the first thing it says, that the VAT numbers are actually in D365. So I've highlighted that. So I need to be able to, this is where my data is, should be able to retrieve. So if you want to retrieve information using a web service, it's typically Power Automate. That's I've highlighted here. Then I want to display the confirmation details, etc. If you want to get the data back from Flow, or Power Automate, and you want to display back to user, it's usually Power App. So just kind of putting this together in a or going through this requirement. So I come up with a very basic design to say, right, okay, I need to have a Power App that can that can show me the results of after calling a web service based on the data that is in finance and operations. Sort of hopefully it makes sense. Let me just go through this in another way. So user sits into finance and operations, it selects a VAT number, it then calls the app, that app then triggers Power Automate, which then call this EU service, and then the results are shown back into finance and operations. Okay, let me demo this. Okay, so if I go to the accounts payable, so by the way, this is your finance and operations instance. If you've not seen one before, it seems to it follows a pretty much same layout as like pretty much all the Microsoft Business application. If I go to the purchase ledger,
we can't see F&O.
Oh, interesting. Thank you. Let me see if I thought I shared the whole screen. Right, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Right, basic. So this is finance and operations. Let me start again. As you can see, it follows the very similar layout as the rest of the Microsoft Business apps. So this is the list of all the suppliers. And let's say if I want to validate, if I go into the details of this supplier, you can see it's got all the details and it's got a VAT number. So manual process would have been copy this VAT number, go to a specific EU website where you stick that number in, you run the process, you click on a button, it basically comes back, confirms the detail. So what we have done, you probably also recognize this sign in here, which Power Apps. This is basically that embedded experience that I was referring to earlier, is that you can actually create apps into using Power Platform, of course, and then you can embed them back into finance and operations. And you can also pass the values from finance and operations into those apps as a parameters, which they can, obviously you can then do anything you like, on the back of it. So we created this app, which I will show you, the actual code behind it as well. It's called VAT Validator. And what this app is doing at the moment, when I click it, it recognized that the count number that I'm sitting on, it passes the VAT number, which VAT number then goes get passed on to Power Automate, which then fetch that relevant information and display back onto a Power App. So how does it look like in the code? Oh, sorry, clicked it instead of. If I click edit, you'll actually see it's a very, very simple app. How are we doing for the time? We've got 20 more minutes. Should be okay. Okay. So as you can see, this is just basically a one-pager. Nothing special going on in here. On the load, we pass a specific value, which value then get passed onto this flow. And flow itself is just a simple HTTP call. This one. Okay. So if you have used these actions before, you can ask for values from Power Apps, and you can send values back to Power Apps as well. Just basics. This simple web service where you pass in the value that you have received from Power Apps, which then send the results back, which you then display. Very basic, simple, tiny little thing, but it, from the user's point of view, if you work for a big organization in a finance department and you have lots of customers or vendors with a VAT number, and you want to check them before you start doing business with them or making payments or receiving payments, whatever, you could use this very, very easily. If I go back to my presentation. Okay, now this is kind of a POC apps, but it's more about showcasing the capabilities and the thought process behind, how you can achieve or implement a bespoke requirement using Power Platform. I've actually built a simple credit card integration from finance and operations. It's a simple app, standalone app that basically connects to Adyen payment connector, a payment provider, and authorizes a payment. So process is very simple. You basically call this app from finance and operations. It passes on the sales order ID. You enter the amount that you want to take from that sales order against that sales order, which uses as a unique reference number. You put the credit card details, and then you get the payment. So again, let me just quickly show this, and then I will explain what is behind this app. Now, I'm not going to be going about the details that this is a PCI compliant or not, and all of that. This is all about just I'm more about showcasing, what is possible rather than is this the right way of doing it or not. So if I find the sales ledger, all sales order. Okay, if I just go in this one. Okay, so a simple sales order. Let's say if we're ready to take a payment, again, you can click on this. If you, by the way, just to quickly go through how to add an app, once you created a Power App, which you have access to, you can click on this button on any page, and all you need is you need to give it a name, and you need an app ID, which basically is the unique value, a unique app ID reference, which you can get from here. Oh, let me go back. Click this, not flow, it's an app. So that's the number you need. and you put that number in, and you then pick the value that you want to pass on to. So you can pass any value from here. So the example that we are using, I pass the sales order ID from here, and then you basically pick the application size, whether you want it to be in the corner, or you want it to be a fully wide app. So let me just cancel that if I run the one that I created that I've already embedded. Okay, here we go. So if you see here, it already know the sales order reference, that sales order number that I have, this is being called from, which is being passed to this Power Apps. You can enter any amount, let's say 55.55. You can specify the name as well, and you can actually get all the information. For example, if you want to fetch the full amount that is due, or you want to fetch the name of the customer, etc., you can do that by calling the auditor services, which I mentioned earlier. That is an option for you to pull the data from F&O. Okay, I'm just going to use this test card number. Expiry date 2020 67. Okay, and now hope that it will go through. Okay, that's done. So it's took that payment out. If I go to the ATM, oh, come on. There we go. So that's our payment. As you can see, it's come across. If I go into F&O, so as I was also talking about earlier, these custom fields, which basically you can add using the user interface, and as you can see here, these are two custom fields that I've added, and those fields have been added, have been updated by my app that I have, that I've created. So it says authorization number and the status of what happened with this. Now, we are also doing is that we're creating a customer payment journal on the back of this as well, and all being done through that app. So if I go again into the customer payment journal, you should see a journal created here for that amount. So not only you're just recording the payment authorization status, etc., you're also creating the related financial entries as well. So the last one should be is this one. I just started this environment this morning, so it's a little bit slow. Okay, there we go. Okay, you can see it came through with the relevant payment, etc. Right, let me just quickly talk you through what actually is in this app and how we built it and what's the thought process behind it. So if I go back to my presentation for a second, and then I will come back and show you the actual code as well. So if you think about the process that, what happened is there, I usually go, when every time we're trying to build anything like this, whether it's a proof of concept or it's actually a real app, we tend to go into into smaller pieces of functionalities that we build, and then test them, and then add another feature, and add another feature, and add another feature. So this way you can build your apps, as pretty much as you go, and it's very quick to build, but more importantly that you can steer as you go along. So what we done initially when I started working on this proof of concept or this demo app, and said, right, okay, I need to have a Power Automate or a flow to call a payment web service. That's the first thing I done. Then I added that flow on a simple Power App to say, right, here's the Power App where you can enter those values. So instead of hard-coded value on the Power Automate, use the values from the Power App. So kind of a next level. And then the next level is, right, okay, now you receive the payment. So the next part was to take that Power App and then embed into F&O. So instead of passing those values manually, let this pass the values through the Power App, using the embedded experience, and so on. And then you show the results into F&O, etc. So basically, you go one step at a time as when you are building these solutions. So let me just quickly show you the app and how it looks like. Again, this is a very simple app from the user. If you remember all those components that we talked about, data, user interfaces, etc. This is a very simple app. As you can see, it's basically one-page app, and all it does is just capture these values. And when you click on the pay button, it actually calls a flow, a Power Automate. And if I just show you that Power Automate as well. It's very simple. It takes the value from the Power App, calls this HTTP service, which is an agent service, and it passes those values, get the results. And once it receives the results, it looks at those results. I mean, I've not built any failure flow in there, for example, if the service was down and things like that, but you get the idea. You could do it, by adding the conditions and then take appropriate actions. But I just created a happy flow in here pretty much. So take the values. Once you receive those values, it uses this option of calling an F&O OData service and updating the two fields that, with the one that I shown you, either authorization code and the status. Then it creates the payment journal. And then show the results back into Power Apps that the process is complete. So this is pretty much it. I just gone through kind of a very high level idea. Hopefully gives you an idea in terms of what you can achieve. Now, as I said, the key is to think about those components separately, i.e. take the data element out from the user interface element. If you are able to move the data into common data service, be it D365 ERP, your Microsoft ERP system or non-Microsoft ERP system, to be honest, the concept remains same. Are you able to move that data into common data service to allow the user to interact with the data, enrich that data, etc., and then are you able to then push those the results of that of the processing back into the ERP system? If you are able to do that, you are able to basically fulfill any gap using Power Platform. Now, there are obviously things that you need to consider. Is it something that as I mentioned earlier, is if it's a mission critical app, you will need to consider all the things that you would normally do. For example, should it be a Canvas app or should it be a model-driven app? Because model-driven apps are much more stable, as we know. And should it be a Power Automate or should it be a logic app? Because all the obvious reasons, etc., etc. But the concept remains same. So my last slide before we go into the questions and answer is this bit, which I want to talk about. This is kind of our experience. This is what we have put together, and we think it works. So basically, every time we have a requirement where we think we can build an app, we basically go create a POC for it. And POC means it's a quick and easy, a quick and dirty implementation to prove the point. Is it possible? Going back to the credit card information, credit card app, for example, can I authorize a payment using Power Automate? Okay, that's my first thing. And if I can do that, I've proven the concept conceptually it is possible. Then you can go into the everything that is mentioned here. Start using some of the templates. Either in that case, you use an HTTP template. You're creating a small feature at any point in time. Get that working. Think about the security of it. Think about the usability and accessibility of that, and then about thinking about performance, etc. And then you think about the cost as well. So if you are calling 10 Power Automates or 10 logic apps as a part of a solution, think about, can it be combined into one? What are the things that you can trim to reduce the cost? And then if you need to add a new feature, go back in again, in the same process. So you are building iteratively. I think the key thing here is that you got to stop at some point when the return of investments against the value it's going to bring back, when that balance kind of start to get out of control. I think that's where you need to stop, because there's no point continuing at that stage. Okay, that's basically it. I'm just going to look at some of the questions. We've got 17 minutes for questions. Barry got a question, can you map more than one CDS instances to a single D365 instance? It's a good question, actually. Can you map more than one CDS instances to a single? I don't think so. I'm not aware of anything because it's usually one-to-one. Especially, for example, if you're using the new deal right functionality and you are creating a new instance of F&O, you need to point at that point to a CDS instance, or you need to configure it later on. As far as I know, I don't think that's possible. Power App. What makes the Power App platform good for compliance? Rich asked a question about the compliance of the Power Platform. It's actually because it's all built on Azure, and Azure by default, I believe, is the level 3 or level 4 PCI compliance. So by default, you are compliant because it's a secure platform. Do you have a blog on how to set up the dual write integration? Yes, there is a very good blog from Microsoft actually on the docs pages, which explains how you can set up the dual write. It's very new. Last week actually I was having some issues with it, which were reported back to Microsoft, and is now fixed. So if you follow that that blog, which I will see if I can find, and I will ping into this chat. Even if you just Google it, you should find it on the docs page. Very simple. Just go from top to bottom, and you should be able to set up. Yes, so there's another question from David. Again, a good question. Have you seen any performance issues using Power Automate with D365? Yes, like I was showing you earlier this morning, it's a little bit slow to start with, and then it start to speed up. It's usually they are related to what's called the, the cold start basically. And the other thing you need to consider is that when you are updating data, or reading or writing data into finance and operations, which option you are using. If you are using OData, for example, if you're using dual write and dual write end up using OData, or using a CDS integrator, or you are using your own custom app which are using OData services, there are limitations on the OData itself, in terms of how much data you can push or how much data you can read. So those things, obviously, there are standard OData kind of limitations that you should adhere to and always think about when you're designing your solution. Other than that, I have not seen any specific challenges with that. What works really well is to actually use the combination of the CDS integrator and the dual write. Okay, so all your master data, with for example, all your products, all your customers, all your vendors, it's best for them to be set up using maybe the CDS integrator, get them bulk exported out from F&O, because when you use a CDS integrator on the F&O side, it uses the data management framework, which can export thousands and thousands of transactions in a fraction of minutes basically, and you can get that data out and pull it into CDS. And more mission critical type information where you want to be 100% accurate at all the time, think about using the dual write. So the combination of the two also works very well. I think that's it. Any other questions? We got a couple of minutes. Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions. I hope you guys find this useful. My contact details are on this page as well. Again, I'm going to share this slide deck. Please feel free to drop me a line. You can reach me on LinkedIn, or you can send me an email on my HSO email account. I will be more than happy to help you guys. Or any questions around this. We've got a stack of apps that some of them are proof of concept, some of them are real customer apps. I'll be more than happy to share my experience.
Well, thank you very much. It's been fantastic. If you would like to join me and unmute your mic, we can try a virtual clap and a round of applause. So anybody who can, how about you unmute your mic and join me in wishing very, very well done.
That's great. Thank you. That is some experience.
That worked pretty well. Right, great. Well, I'm going to post a link to the app so you can find out what the next session you can join. And as Touseef said, the slides will be posted. We'll be putting up on the recording up on YouTube and on D365UG/UK. And thank you very much for attending.
That's great. Thanks, guys. Cheers.